A young waitress paid a stranger's diner bill, never imagining that the man across from her was a lonely millionaire CO whose life was about to change forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story is reaching. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. Emma Carter stepped through the swinging doors of the little downtown diner, her blonde hair tucked into a messy ponytail, a few strands escaping to catch the soft sunlight. At 24, she was young, but there was a quiet steadiness about her, the kind that made people feel like everything was going to be okay, even when it clearly wasn't. She tied her apron, smoothed her uniform, and took a deep breath, readying herself for another long day serving coffee, pancakes, and slices of hope to whoever wandered through the door. The diner was small, not the kind you read about in glossy magazines, but it had heart. The smell of fresh bread, sizzling bacon, and brewing coffee wrapped around the worn vinyl booths like a warm blanket. And Emma, moving between tables with effortless grace, made everyone feel at home. That morning, she noticed him before anyone else did. A man sitting alone in a corner booth, dark hair neatly combed, a suit that didn't quite match the cozy diner surroundings. His hands were folded on the table, eyes fixed somewhere far away, a quiet weight in his shoulders that made him seem almost invisible. He looked up just long enough to catch her glance, and Emma smiled. Something about him told her he wasn't here for the pancakes or the eggs or the coffee. He was here for a pause, a moment to breathe in a world that demanded more than he could always give. Minutes passed. He fumbled through his wallet, and that's when Emma noticed he didn't have enough to cover his meal. Her first instinct? To act. No second thoughts. No hesitation. She walked over, soft but confident. "Don't worry about it," she said, a gentle smile on her lips. "I've got it." The man looked up, surprised. A flicker of confusion, maybe even embarrassment, crossed his face. I can pay you back," he stammered. Emma shook her head. "No need. Just enjoy your breakfast." She turned and moved back to her station, leaving him stunned, unsure whether to look away or keep staring. As she poured coffee for another table, her mind wandered, briefly, quietly, to the past, to nights when she had nothing herself, and small acts of kindness had meant everything. To her brother, gone too soon, and the life lessons he had left behind. And in that small, fleeting moment, she realized something simple but profound. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the heaviest weight. Across the room, the man watched her, blonde hair catching the light as she moved, the subtle kindness in her eyes, the way she smiled at strangers as if their troubles mattered more than her own. And he felt something he hadn't in years, a glimmer of hope. Emma didn't know it yet. She didn't know who he was, or what lay behind that carefully curated suit. She didn't know that, for the first time in a long while, her small act of generosity had reached someone who, in another life, had everything and yet nothing at all. She went about her morning, taking orders, laughing softly at a child's joke, wiping down counters, unaware that a single choice, the choice to pay for a stranger's breakfast, had just set a chain of events in motion that neither of them could have imagined. Emma returned to her station, wiping down the counter, refilling sugar jars, and smiling at familiar faces, completely unaware of the quiet presence that lingered in the corner booth. The man had finished his breakfast, left a modest tip, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. But inside him, something had shifted. His name was David Harper. At 35, he was the kind of man who usually commanded attention without ever asking for it. CEO of a successful tech company, he had built an empire from scratch, rising higher than most people could even dream. But that morning, in the warm glow of the diner, David felt small. Life had a way of stripping even the most powerful people of their control. 2 years ago, he had lost someone irreplaceable. His fiancée had passed away unexpectedly, leaving him with the weight of wealth and success, but none of the comfort of companionship. Offices, boardrooms, luxury cars, none of it could fill the silence that followed him everywhere he went. He had come to the diner that morning on impulse, craving anonymity, a brief escape from his carefully constructed world. And then he had met Emma. He replayed the moment in his mind. blonde hair catching the light, eyes that weren't just kind, they were steady, patient, understanding. The way she moved, aware of the world but never weighed down by it. And then the gesture, paying for his meal without a second thought, without expecting anything in return. David had spent years accustomed to being the one who gave. Donations, sponsorships, investments, favors. He had the means to fix almost anything, except he realized now, people's hearts. And here was a stranger, a waitress, doing exactly that. He found himself wondering about her life. Was it easy? Probably not. Something about the quiet strength in her smile suggested she had known hardship. He imagined her mornings before sunrise, bustling through the diner, juggling tables, family responsibilities, dreams she hadn't had the time to chase. And yet she still noticed him. She had still cared, even in a world where he had grown used to being invisible. David lingered outside the diner for a moment, his breath forming clouds in the morning chill. He wanted to say something more, to thank her properly, but the words felt inadequate. How do you tell someone they've touched the part of you that you didn't even know was aching? How do you convey that a simple, selfless act has cracked open a door the hope you thought had long been sealed? He walked away slowly, leaving the warmth of the diner behind. But the memory of Emma's smile followed him. Her small act of kindness had unsettled him in the most profound way possible. It reminded him that life was not measured in bank accounts or accolades, but in the quiet, unnoticed moments when someone chooses compassion over indifference. For Emma, the morning went on as it always did. For David, it was the beginning of something entirely different, a recognition that the world could still surprise him, that sometimes the people who appeared insignificant could leave the largest impact. And somewhere deep inside, he knew he would find his way back. Because Emma's kindness wasn't something that could be forgotten, not by him, not ever. Emma wiped her hands on her apron and leaned for a moment against the counter. The diner hummed with life around her. Coffee machine sputtering, forks clinking against plates, quiet conversations weaving through the air. But in the brief silence of her own thoughts, she felt the weight of everything she carried. At 24, she had learned quickly that life wasn't gentle. Her parents had worked long hours, leaving her to care for her younger brother, Max. He had been a whirlwind of energy, laughter, and mischief, the kind of boy who could light up a room just by being in it. But life had other plans. Max had been diagnosed with a chronic illness when he was just 12. Emma had watched hospitals, machines, and doctors become the backdrop of their home, her childhood slipping quietly into the spaces between appointments and sleepless nights. She remembered the nights she would sit beside him, brushing his hair back from his forehead, whispering stories to keep his spirits alive while her own heart ached. She had prayed, bargained, pleaded with a universe that often seemed deaf to suffering. And when Max passed away, she felt a part of herself die with him. That grief, raw and unrelenting, could have hardened her, could have made her shut herself off from a world. But instead, it had done something else. It had opened her heart. She had chosen empathy. She had chosen to give, even when it hurt, even when the world offered nothing in return. Working at the diner wasn't just a job. It was a way to channel that empathy, to be present for people in the smallest ways. A comforting smile, a plate served hot, a quiet word of reassurance when someone felt unseen. Emma had learned that even tiny gestures mattered, that sometimes they carried a weight far greater than anyone realized. Her co-workers barely noticed when she lingered at a table longer than necessary, quietly listening to a customer vent about a rough night or a bad day. They didn't see the countless times she stayed late, cleaning up, making sure the diner felt like a safe place for everyone who came through the doors. But Emma didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she had known what it was like to feel invisible, to feel as though no one noticed your pain. And that morning, when she had paid for David's breakfast without hesitation, it wasn't just kindness, it was instinct. She understood, in a way few people could, that sometimes people needed a reminder that someone cared, that someone saw them, that they weren't entirely alone. As she moved through the tables, refilling coffee cups, she caught herself glancing toward the window where David had been. She didn't know his story. She couldn't have guessed at the losses he carried, or the solitude that came with being at the top of a world so often built on appearances rather than hearts. She only knew what she had always known. Every person deserved a moment of compassion. Every life mattered, even when no one else seemed to notice. Emma's blonde hair fell loosely over her shoulders as she leaned to clear a tray, the morning sunlight catching it in soft golden highlights. She smiled at a young couple, reassured an elderly man, laughed quietly with a child tugging at her apron. Each small interaction, each gesture of care, was a thread weaving her quiet, invisible strength into the fabric of everyone else's day. And as the diner buzzed around her, Emma didn't know that the ripple she had created, simply by noticing, simply by caring, was far larger than she could imagine. That a single act of empathy, a single moment of attention, would soon touch someone whose world had long been filled with emptiness, and ultimately set into motion a connection neither of them could have predicted. For Emma, this was life. A life of struggle, yes, but also a life of meaning, of seeing beyond herself, of giving quietly, fiercely, without expectation. And sometimes, she thought, that was enough to change everything. David Harper walked back to his sleek downtown apartment, the city buzzing beneath him like a living organism he had spent years trying to control. And yet, in that space, high above the streets, he felt invisible. Surrounded by luxury, accolades, and the constant hum of success, there was a silence in him that no boardroom or paycheck could fill. At 35, he had everything, or at least what the world said counted as everything. His company dominated the tech scene. He had homes in 3 cities, a wardrobe that could rival any celebrities. But the truth he kept hidden was simple. He was profoundly alone. It had been 2 years since her death. His fiancée, the love of his life, gone before they even had a chance to build the life they had imagined together. Every corner of his apartment reminded him of what he had lost, the unfinished painting she had started, the soft throws she loved on the couch, the coffee mugs that sat silently in pairs on the counter. Everything around him spoke of her absence. David had learned to hide it well. In public, he was confident, decisive, untouchable. In private, he wandered through empty halls, sometimes pausing in front of a mirror, searching for a version of himself that had been lost somewhere along the way. Nights were the hardest. He would sit by the window, city lights reflecting in his eyes, wondering if life would ever feel full again. And then that morning, at the small diner tucked into a quiet street downtown, something had shifted. A blonde waitress, moving with effortless grace, had noticed him, not for his wealth, not for his status, not for his accomplishments. She had seen him. She had noticed that he was struggling, and she had acted without hesitation, paying for his meal, smiling, offering warmth in a world that had been cold for far too long. David replayed the moment over and over. He remembered the tilt of her head, the subtle patience in her eyes, the way she carried herself like kindness wasn't extraordinary, but expected. And he realized, in a way that startled him, how starved he'd been for something so simple. Human connection, compassion, recognition without ulterior motive. For the first time in years, he felt the fragile stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. He began to wonder about her life. How did someone so young, so seemingly fragile, develop such quiet strength? What hardships had shaped her? The answer, he suspected, would be found in the same way he had felt it that morning. In the weight of unseen sacrifices, in the moments where she chose empathy over indifference, and in the courage it took to care for strangers without expecting anything in return. That evening, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The city skyline blurred past a window as he sat in silence, drinking coffee from a plain mug that reminded him of simpler times. He didn't want to intrude on her life. He didn't want to make her feel obligated or uncomfortable. But he needed to understand the person who had reminded him that life could still be beautiful, even after heartbreak. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't a fleeting encounter. Emma's kindness had left a mark on him, a quiet, unshakable impression that would guide his steps, even if he wasn't sure how yet. David Harper, the man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, had never been this vulnerable. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt an unfamiliar truth. Some people enter your life not to change in grand gestures, but to remind you that the world still has room for unexpected grace. And in that moment, Sitting in the soft glow of his apartment, he realized he would find his way back. Back to her. Back to the simplicity of connection he hadn't even known he had been missing. A few days later, Emma wiped down a booth near the window, sunlight streaming across the chipped wood and faded upholstery. The diner was quiet, a lull between the morning rush and the lunch crowd. She hummed softly to herself, a simple tune she had learned from her brother, Max, long ago. And then she saw him, David Harper. At first, she thought it was a trick of her imagination. He was sitting at a corner table, casually dressed in a dark jacket and jeans, coffee in hand, eyes scanning the newspaper, but clearly aware of the world around him. Her heart skipped, a flutter of recognition she wasn't expecting. He looked up and met her eyes. A faint, almost shy smile crossed his lips. And in that instant, the diner, the routine, the clatter, the familiar hum of life, shifted just enough to remind her that the world had a way of bringing the right people back into your life at the exact right moment. David didn't rush over. He didn't make a scene. He simply sat there, observing quietly, as though he wanted to understand her world before stepping into it. And Emma, ever perceptive, noticed the care in his posture, the way he lingered in the background rather than imposing himself. Something about that restraint made him safe. Her morning continued. She took orders, poured coffee, laughed softly with a young couple in the corner, but she felt the pull of his presence like a quiet tug at her sleeve. Every so often, her gaze drifted toward him, and each time their eyes met, a small connection sparked. Hesitant, fragile, but undeniable. For David, it was the first time in years that he had truly wanted to linger somewhere not for business, not for appearances, but for a human moment. He watched her move between tables, attentive, patient, kind. He noticed the way she smiled at the elderly man in the corner, the gentle way she leaned down to comfort a child who had dropped her spoon. And he realized something that startled him. He had been looking for connection in all the wrong places. The world he had built, the empire he had grown, it had taught him to expect nothing, to trust few. But here, in this small diner, everything felt real. Finally, as the lunch rush began to stir, David rose. He didn't want to startle her or make her feel awkward. He walked toward the exit slowly, then paused. He turned just enough so that she caught the motion. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a gentle recognition that neither of them could fully articulate yet, but both understood. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she carried a tray to another table. She didn't fully understand why her heart raced or why a familiar warmth spread through her chest. She had no idea who he truly was, and she didn't need to. All she knew was that fate, or something like it, had placed him back in her world, offering a chance of a connection she hadn't realized she had been waiting for. David stepped out into the sunlight, letting the door close softly behind him. He paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the diner, and in that quiet, suspended moment, he promised himself something he hadn't in years, that he would find a way to let her know just how much he had changed his life, without expectation, without pressure, simply truth. Inside, Emma exhaled softly, steadying herself. The morning had taken on a different weight, a subtle shift she couldn't yet name. But somewhere deep in her chest, she sensed it, the faint stirrings of something new, fragile, and undeniably real. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. Over the next few days, David returned to the diner, each visit quieter, smaller than the last, yet heavier with unspoken intention. He never sat at the same table twice, never made a show of himself. He simply existed in the background, a shadow that seemed to anchor her world without disturbing it. Emma noticed him, of course. She could not notice. There was something about the way he moved, careful, deliberate, yet curious. Not just curious about the diner or the people or even her, but about life itself in its quiet, messy, human ways. One afternoon, a customer dropped a tray, shattering plates across the floor. Instinctively, Emma knelt to gather the pieces, flinching at the sharp edges. Before she could react, David was beside her, crouching without hesitation. Together, they swept and picked up the fragments, a silent rhythm passing between them. "Thanks," she said softly, looking up. His eyes met hers, warm, steady, aware. "No need to thank me," he murmured. You do this every day for everyone else. I just helped once. It was a small moment, barely noticeable to anyone else in the diner. But for them, it was a bridge. A wordless understanding that kindness didn't have to be grand to matter. That shared humanity, simple, unpretentious, real, was a foundation stronger than any luxury, any fortune. They began talking, gradually, in pauses between tables, in moments of calm. She learned he had lost someone important, that he carried weight no one could see. He learned about Max, about the sacrifices she had made, the grief she still carried quietly beneath her smiles. Each revelation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. It was just life, unfiltered, real, and slowly it stitched them together. David would offer small gestures, refilling her water, quietly clearing a table, while Emma, in turn, shared tiny pieces of her world, a memory, a joke Max had loved, a glimpse of her unshakable compassion. And in those exchanges, they found something rare. Not romance yet, not even fully trust, just recognition. The deep, unspoken acknowledgement that they had both been shaped by loss, and that perhaps in each other they might find a gentle solace. By the end of the week, a subtle rhythm had formed. She moved through the diner with her usual grace, and he followed in quiet curiosity, watching, learning, but never pushing. And in that rhythm, quiet, patient, full of small acts of care, something unspoken began to grow. A bond built not on spectacle or expectation, but on the simplest, most profound truth, that people mattered, that hearts could heal, and that sometimes a stranger could become the most important presence in your life. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when David finally spoke about who he really was. The diner was nearly empty, the steady patter of rain against the windows blending with the soft clink of cups and cutlery. Emma wiped down a counter, unaware that today would change everything. He slid into a booth across from her when she stepped away for a moment. "Emma," he began, voice careful, low, almost hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." She turned, curious, wary, but trusting. "What is it?" David hesitated, studying her face, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, the faint trace of concern that never left her expression. "I'm not just anyone you've noticed here," he said slowly. "I'm David Harper." The name landed between them like a stone dropped into a still pond. Emma froze. Recognition collided with disbelief. David Harper, the CEO, the public figure whose life seemed untouchable, sitting here in a quiet diner, looking at her like a person, not a headline. You're him," she whispered, voice trembling. Her mind raced. All those small gestures, the quiet presence, the patience, everything she had felt, everything she had noticed, it suddenly clicked. "Yes," he said gently. "I didn't want to make you feel obligated. I didn't want to take advantage of you or your kindness. I just needed to show up here in a way that mattered, honestly." As Emma took a step back, heart pounding. "All this time, you were more than just a stranger?" David shook his head slightly, a small, rueful smile tugging at his lips. "I'm still learning how to be more than the person everyone else sees. But you reminded me that being human isn't about status or control. It's about moments like this. Moments of honesty, of connection. Moments where someone sees you and treats you like you matter." Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of truth. Emma's chest rose and fell rapidly as she processed the revelation. She had unknowingly offered kindness to a man who carried the world on his shoulders, and he had quietly honored that, never asking for recognition, never expecting anything in return. Finally, she exhaled a mix of relief and awe. "I don't even know what to say." David leaned forward, voice soft but steady. "You don't have to say anything. You were kind when it mattered most. That's all anyone could ever ask." And in that quiet, rain-soaked diner, the barrier between them, the worlds, the assumptions, the titles crumbled. For the first time, they were simply two people, human and real, standing on the same ground. And in that shared space, everything else could wait. Word spread faster than either of them could have anticipated. A local blogger had spotted David and Emma together at the diner and posted a story that quickly went viral. The Millionaire and the Waitress, real love or publicity stunt? Emma read the headline on her phone, stomach twisting. The diner had gone from quiet familiarity to an endless stream of curiosity and whispered judgments. Customers were polite, but there was a tension, an unspoken question in every glance. David noticed too. He didn't shy away, didn't try to shield her. Instead, he came into the diner quietly one evening, hands full of takeout boxes, and simply sat across from her. "They're going to say what they want," he said softly, "but it doesn't change anything here." Emma looked up, heart racing. "It feels like everyone is watching, like every smile, every word I say is being judged." He nodded. "I know, and I can't make the world stop, but I can be here, with you, every step of the way." Over the next few days, they navigated the scrutiny together. Reporters lingered outside, social media exploded with speculation, and even well-meaning friends offered warnings. But every time Emma faltered, David was there, not as a CEO, not as a headline, but as someone who understood her courage, her compassion, and her heart. And slowly, the tension began to ease. Emma learned to smile with confidence again, knowing that her actions, small acts of kindness, honesty, and integrity, spoke louder than any gossip. David's presence was a quiet anchor, a reminder that they could face the world together, without letting it define them. They found strength in routine. Early mornings at the diner, shared coffees between shifts, walks in the park where no one else could see them. With every small moment, the scrutiny lost its power and their bond grew, not flashy or dramatic, but steady, enduring, and real. By the end of the week, they understood something profound. It wasn't the world opinion that mattered. It was their shared humanity, their willingness to face challenges together, and the quiet trust that had formed between them. And in that understanding, they discovered a freedom far greater than any headline could ever offer. Months passed, and the world's attention began to fade. But for Emma and David, a new chapter was just beginning. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something larger, something neither of them could have imagined. They started meeting quietly after shifts, talking about ways to give back, to create meaning from the small miracles that had brought them together. Emma shared stories of the people she'd met at the diner. Families struggling to get by, young students working double shifts, elderly patrons with no one to check on them. David listened, taking it all in, not as a businessman calculating profit, but as someone learning the weight and beauty of real human lives. And slowly, an idea began to take shape. What if we could make this bigger? Emma asked one evening, wiping her hands on a napkin. Not just one meal, one act, but something that actually changes lives. David looked at her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Then we build it," he said simply. "We turn what brought us together into something lasting, something that keeps giving long after today." Together, they founded the Harper Emma Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping underprivileged families, funding small businesses, and supporting local community projects. They didn't do it for recognition. They did it because they had seen how one small act, one unexpected gesture, could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. Emma found purpose in every file she opened, every story she read, every family she helped. And David, once isolated in his towering office, discovered the quiet fulfillment of building something that mattered not in numbers, but in human lives. Their bond deepened naturally, not in grand gestures, but in shared effort, late-night planning sessions, and the unspoken understanding that they were in this together. Acts of kindness had led to purpose. Purpose had led to trust, and trust had become something enduring, something alive, something worth protecting. In that way, Emma's single choice, the day she paid for a stranger's diner bill, had grown far beyond the moment itself. It had planted a seed, and together, they were tending to it, nurturing it, watching it grow into a legacy of compassion that would touch countless lives for years to come. Years later, the diner remained small and unassuming, a place where lives intersected quietly and kindness still mattered. Emma moved to the tables with her familiar grace, her blonde hair catching the morning light, a soft smile playing on her lips. She still remembered the day she had paid for a stranger's bill, not knowing that one simple gesture would change everything. David had returned often, not as a headline, not as a millionaire CEO, but as someone present, attentive, human. They shared laughter over coffee, gentle teasing over spilled orders, and moments of quiet reflection in the corners of the diner. The world could still watch, speculate, or misunderstand, but it no longer mattered. They had built something stronger than gossip, stronger than wealth, a life of shared purpose and unwavering trust. Together, they continued their work with the foundation. Families received support, students got scholarships, and the ripple of that single act of generosity, the act that brought them together, spread further than either of them could have imagined. Each life touched was a reminder that love and kindness often arrive in unexpected ways. One evening, as the golden light of sunset poured through the diner's windows, Emma and David stood outside, hands entwined, watching the world pass by. A gentle breeze lifted the leaves around them, carrying with it the quiet promise of new beginnings. David squeezed her hand and whispered, "It didn't start with love, Emma. It started with life. And somehow it brought us here." Emma leaned against him, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "And now we get to keep giving it back." They walked inside together, stepping into the warmth, the hum of conversation, the comforting clatter of dishes. Life had given them second chances, and they had chosen to make the most of them, not for recognition, not for headlines, but for the simple, enduring power of connection. And in that quiet, ordinary place, extraordinary things continue to happen. Love grew, lives were healed, and hope, once fragile, now flourished. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, or inspired you to see the beauty in everyday moments, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Join us on Heartfelt Tales TV for more stories that linger long after they end. Stories that celebrate love, resilience, and the magic of second chances. Because sometimes a single act can change a life, and maybe even the world.